Welcome to the Real Wealth Investor Academy. This module will be on how to read a residential appraisal report. And we've got one of the best here with us today to walk us through it. So Rich Paddock is a certified residential appraiser and senior partner of Paddock Appraisal Service, Inc. in Modesto. Welcome, Rich.
Good afternoon.
So glad you could be with us here. Now, you do a lot of education, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you mostly train appraisers?
Usually training appraisers, a lot of times training realtors on how to read appraisals and understand the appraisal process.
Very good. Well, that's what we want to do here today, but this is more for the investor to make sure that they're getting something they can depend on, which wasn't necessarily the case in 2005, 2006. But I don't know that appraisers could do much warning that the prices were overpriced, because that's not really your job.
No, we could project what the market was doing. The biggest issue is that the investors didn't want to listen to it.
Oh, are you seeing that happen today?
Yes. Most appraisers I deal with feel that we're back in a bubble, but it's a minor bubble that's similar to the 1990s.
Okay, but it could get worse.
Yeah, we don't see the big collapse like we did because we don't see values going through the roof. Money is very inexpensive, but not as cheap as it used to be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we've got this uniform residential appraisal report in front of us, and you wanted it to be empty for a reason. You know, I wanted to use a sample one, but you said, no, that could be confusing. So we've got one that is blank. So where do we start here? What do we need to pay attention to on this page?
For your listeners, let me lay out some groundwork. The users of the Uniform Residential Appraisal Report have changed the format of the report and the content. So when an investor or a borrower reads a copy of an appraisal today, on it they're going to see a lot of acronyms and computer code because Fannie and Freddie have decided to go the way of most companies where all of their product is web-based. And so as we go through the report, I'll explain what a reader will see in terms of a narrative explanation, but what they may also see in terms of a computer code and what that computer code actually means.
Yeah, where do we start here?
I'm just going to start at the top. At the very top is
that's a good place.
a box called the subject. That should include anything that's relevant to the subject property, who owns it, who the borrower is, an assessor's parcel number. Lenders like appraisers to put in the tax year and what the current taxes are or what the taxes may be. It's really just a way to identify the property and what type of appraisal it is. Was it for a purchase, a refinance, or something else? And you drop down the next box, where the contract is. That's primarily for the lender that's going to loan the money. They want to know, did the appraiser read the contract, and did that contract have any content that would influence the appraisal process? And if it does, the lender wants the appraiser to put it in there. For a borrower's standpoint, the information on the contract they are already aware of. So that part of the appraisal is really not of importance to them.
Okay.
The next box of the neighborhood, now we're getting to the important part of the appraisal report. This is where it's going to show up that an appraiser is not geographically competent to appraise in the specific area where either the borrower's property is or the investor's loan may be placed. If an appraiser is knowledgeable of the area, and I'm going to assume that a borrower is reading this report and it's for a house that they own, so they're real familiar with the neighborhood. And if the descriptions in that neighborhood section don't match the borrower's idea of what the neighborhood is, that's kind of a little red flag for the borrower or the reader of the report to come to the conclusion that maybe the appraiser doesn't really know the market area that well, and the reader needs to be cautious from that point on.
Now, where would you be able to notice that?
The narrative, you can ignore the check boxes, and the one-unit housing that's up in the upper right-hand corner in present land use, those are going to vary, and those are statistical data that the appraiser gets. However, all appraisers will put a narrative description under neighborhood boundaries, and in that neighborhood boundaries, they are required to put specific items like Main Street is on the north, South Street is on the east, Lee Street is on the south, the Southern Pacific Rail Line is on the west. They have to delineate the boundaries of the neighborhood. And the next line says neighborhood description. They describe what is in the neighborhood. Is it mostly single-family homes? Is there some commercial? Does there a river run through it? Is there a big park in the middle of it? Is there something that is detrimental or beneficial to the neighborhood that's within those boundaries? And that neighborhood also restricts the appraiser's selection of comparable sales and listings. And the next line you go down to is market conditions. And that's, again, narrative, and a reader should be able to see what the appraiser's opinion is of what is happening in the market. Is the market increasing in value? Is it increasing rapidly? And which the appraiser should be stating that they're seeing values go up 2% a month or 1% or in those lines. Is it falling? Is there something planned for the immediate area that's going to affect the market conditions in that neighborhood? Like there's a freeway that's being surveyed that runs down the side of the neighborhood and is going to be an 8-lane major freeway going from a 2-lane.
Would an average appraiser know that?
Yes, if they're geographically competent, they will know all that information for that neighborhood. A good appraiser not only follows what's happening in a neighborhood, but they follow what's happening in the city and the surrounding area in the county. So they should be aware of incoming either transportation hubs, incoming major employers, like let's say that Amazon is going to open a distribution center at the edge of the city and bring in 6,000 jobs. An appraiser that's geographically competent and knows the area well is going to be aware of that information.
Why is that? Do you subscribe to news feeds, or is it just word of mouth, or is it certain companies are better at really understanding these market conditions? Because that seems like a lot of information to have to stay on top of.
Most appraisers are detectives on a continuous basis. The good appraisers are always reading anything that they can find that can affect values in any fashion, negative or positive. So good appraisers will know about something that's about to happen, and if in a neighborhood like I'm describing, if they are aware that there's something in the general area that is changing, they're going to zero down to this neighborhood and go, okay, will this affect this neighborhood? Will there be a change in traffic flow or traffic patterns or crime because of what's about to occur? And that's been the problem in the past, is an appraiser may have come from San Diego to Sacramento and completed an appraisal in Sacramento and has never read anything about what's happening in Sacramento, even though it's the capital of the state. And that appraiser is liable to miss something that could adversely affect an investor's portfolio that bought the loan, or not provide an accurate value of the property for a borrower.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. So that's kind of the first section that has a lot of narrative that a reader can get a sense of. Does the appraiser know what they're talking about, and is the writing level that the appraiser uses indicate that the appraiser is somewhat educated and is not a like a clerk or somebody that's just filling out the form for someone else to sign.
And that's been a real issue these past few years, hasn't it?
Yes. When licensing became into effect in 1991 or 92, you just had to be able to breathe to get an appraisal license. And all of the government agencies that provide employment suggestions for individuals said, go get an appraiser license. You can make a lot of money. You don't have to have education. You have to have some classes. You need to know what an appraisal is and how appraisals work. But there was no formal education. There was no time and grade. No work experience required. That no longer applies. In today's market, if an appraiser comes to your house or property, they've had anywhere from 2 to 4 years of formal education, usually have a bachelor's degree of some kind. They've had to have anywhere from 2,500 to 4,500 hours of experience, which is 2 to 4 years, before they can get their license level. And so appraisers today are very educated, except there's a handful that came out of that 1990s period that still don't quite have the education level, but they're pretty rare anymore.
Okay, good.
Okay. Any questions on the neighborhood section?
Nope.
Okay. Site is, again, that just describes what is on the site for the property, removing all improvements like the house or garage or building or whatever. It's just going to describe how the property is zoned. Again, if the appraiser is knowledgeable and exercises due diligence, then they're going to tell the reader what the zoning actually is and what can be used on that site. If you've got a house that's, let's say, 70 years old, and the surrounding homes have all been converted to commercial, that zoning on that site probably is no longer residential. It's commercial use. You can still sell it and use it as a residence, but its zoning has changed. And an appraiser that knows their work is going to tell the reader, this is what this is zoned. The reader of the report, if it's their property, that's just another red flag. If the appraiser does not tell them that it's what the correct zoning is, then the reader's going to go, okay, I've got some other issues. But the appraiser will describe everything on the site too. Is there public utilities? Do they have a well? Do they have a septic? Are the well and septic typical for the area, or is water and sewer in the street and it should be hooked up? The appraiser will also be able to tell a reader, is the property in a flood zone or not. Then it's up to the reader to decide with this information what they do with it. Okay?
Okay.
Any questions about the site?
No.
Okay.
That's great.
The improvement section, the next block, it's going to just describe the improvements. A general description of how many units are on the property, whether it's attached or detached, is it existing or is it under construction or proposed. All appraisers are now required to define what type of home is on the site. If it's a ranch style, craftsman, contemporary, eclectic, farmhouse style, appraisers now have to determine that style of home, and that's a Fannie and Freddie requirement. They tell the reader what year it was built, what its effective age is. The effective age is fairly important for the reader, including the borrower, because that's the appraiser's interpretation of how well the house has been maintained. If a house is 60 years old, but the effective age that the appraiser says it's only 15 years old, then a reader is going to interpret that the subject is equal to a house that is 15 years old, but has been maintained but never upgraded. And they're going to assume that this 60-year-old house has been upgraded to the type of amenities that a 15-year-old house would have in it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and the rest of the check boxes and fields in there just describe what the amenities of the home are. Our type of roof, is it shake, composition shingle, concrete tile, clay tile, exterior walls, wood, stucco, so forth, all the way through to the interior. Is it drywall? Is it plaster? Are the floors ceramic tile, or are they sheet vinyl? Are they linoleum? Car storage. The readers need to remember when they're looking at appraisal that it is not designed for their benefit. It's designed for someone to make a loan on the property. And so the details regarding the subject property are specific to that process. So some things that a reader may see in there they may disagree with, but the appraiser and lender have a language code, quote, that they determine between themselves, what that code means. And sometimes those code words don't make sense to a reader. It doesn't reflect poorly on the appraiser or the content of the report. It's just a use of language that a novice reader that has never read an appraisal before may go, well, my house isn't like that, when really it's just a code between the appraiser and their client, the lender, as to what is actually there.
Okay, very good.
No questions on that?
No, you're just doing a great job here.
Okay. The narrative part that a reader can really focus in is if you drop down to the last half of that improvement section, that becomes narrative. Additional features is going to describe anything. We typically state in there that the kitchen has granite counters, cherry cabinets, ceramic tile flooring, Gen Air appliances. We describe in a narrative fashion what we were seeing in the house, so we can relay to typically the lender or the underwriter a feeling of the quality level and the types of amenities that are in the home. And if I had given you have a picture in your mind of what I just described of granite slabs, cherry counters, ceramic tile flooring, and Gen Air ranges. If I change that to Formica counters and stained birch cabinets and vinyl tile flooring and low-end appliances, the vision in your mind changed from one to another. And that's what we try to do to the reader of the report. And a borrower can look at that narrative in that section and go, okay, that describes my house. It's pretty sparse, but it describes my house. Now, if there's errors in that portion, that's just another little red flag for the reader to go, okay, the appraiser was in the house for only 5 minutes and he really didn't see what I had that I consider of value.
I see.
Okay. Now, the very next line below that additional features where it says describe the condition of the property, that entire section is going to be in computer code. And I forwarded you a second PDF that says Uniform Appraisal Data Set, which you can post. It talks about condition ratings and definition, and they go C1 through C6, which is condition, and Q1 through Q4, which are quality ratings. Those are Fannie and Freddie definitions that are required to be placed in that box, which tells a computer how to rate the subject property. Most appraisers, including us, will add some narrative after that if we have room that says the property's been well maintained and it's good quality, or its quality level is typical to the neighborhood, or there's some significant detrimental conditions, and here's what they are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Physical deficiencies, those typically are blank unless there's something major, like the foundation has failed, the roof has failed, because if a lender sees anything in that box, the likelihood of the loan proceeding past that point is very slim, because that now the security for the loan is in jeopardy. And so if your reader or borrower sees something that in that field, that should be reporting some detrimental condition, whether they're aware of it or not, that is adverse to the property, whether it's something with the site, something with the home, the garage, some type of improvement failure. Okay?
Okay.
And then the final box under improvements is the lender or investor wants to know, is this house typical? They don't want to hear that, no, it's not typical because all the homes in the neighborhood are single story and my subject is a 3-story with multiple additions. And so if there's descriptive narrative in that section of the report, again, that's going to be an indication to the reader that there are problems with the property.